Ladies and gentlemen, this is William Keat of lawandalchemy.org and commonlawconstitution.org. Welcome back. This is the continuation of the series on individualism and collectivism, and I think this is now part 5. So we're getting through it. Now, in the last section, we looked at some of the issues to do with collectivism and the difference between collective, being in a collective, and part of and what it is to engage in collectivist behavior or collectivism, which is a different thing. And we came to the conclusion that was really largely about coercion and about the fact that you're in a group on the basis of voluntary action. That's just being part of a collective. But if there's some kind of involvement in a group or effect of a group that is involving force or coercion, then you are into the realms of collectivism, which is tricky. So now what we're going to do is dive a little bit deeper into how that happens. And one of the main ways is confusing equality and equity. Now, the difference between that is, well, equality is all about the judgment, if you like, of how fortunate people are in their conditions or assets in life. Or is there inequality in society between people that have things and have not? It's the haves and have-nots, you could say, is the study of that, isn't it, really? Whereas equity is about equal treatment under the law. Are people treated the same under the same set of standards, which is what we talked about further back. Now, the intention behind legislating or legislation, and I can get into that more, and I tend to get into that more on the other channel and the other website, commonlawconstitution.org, because we get into the specifics of how the law works there. But just briefly, the intention behind legislating is sometimes an attempt to control behavior, which might have something to do with justice and morality. It's putting in a sort of a standard, if you like, to or a red flag exercise on something to do with behavior or morality, which might be fine as long as it's in alignment with the Constitution, which is what I talk about on the other website. But usually, legislation is more about an attempt to adjust the problems of perceived inequality. Yeah, so people spot problems in people who are in positions of power, spot those issues, if you like, and try to correct it in some way. So concerning oneself with equality is about trying to alter the conditions or assets of people through policy, which you're ultimately never going to be able to achieve because it's an exhaustive exercise, which can ultimately never really be accomplished, because there are potentially millions of ways that different people are better off in all sorts of different ways that can be. Some people are stronger physically and some are weaker. Some are faster at reading, which might give them a bit of a leg up on things. They might have a better memory. They might have more money. Some people might be lucky enough to have a really big house. Is that a really big thing? I don't know. For some people it might be. Yeah, there are always going to be advantages and disadvantages to people in life, and you know we'll get onto that in a little bit more in a moment, actually. But you know that's really what we're talking about here with equality, is trying to adjust people's level of fortune or misfortune, if you like. So the people in charge essentially are spotting problems of what they perceive as inequality in society, and are attempting to fix this through essentially what is a redistribution of assets or conditions. That's essentially what it is, isn't it? And you can see that there are problems with that already. Now, inequality, this is important. If you think about it, and I've already hinted at this, is in the mind of the beholder, because it's really about perception or bias or prejudice. Now, quite often, it's very obvious that some people are having a tough time in life. And that's not to say that one shouldn't be concerned about that and shouldn't be charitable in that. Absolutely, we should be. Of course, that's the case. But we've got to be careful that we don't confuse these two about righting what we perceive as an inequality as opposed to equity. So righting a wrong is meant to be about moral behavior. It's calling out wrongdoing that has already occurred and applying punishment if necessary. But probably should be less about punishment ultimately and more about restorative actions. Righting a wrong is not about forcing people to correct what you see as an imbalance of misfortune. Collectivists often see someone's misfortune as a crime or a fault of someone else who might have or might be perceived to have privilege. But more often than not, this itself is to do with previous economics by the collectivist state adjusting those dynamics of redistribution. Yeah, so you can get into that as to why some people are seen to be more privileged and have more things, maybe, whatever that may be, and others don't. But you can never right that. You can never really correct that. And frankly, who actually decides what is correct and what isn't? What are the things that you want to identify that would cause you to correct it in your mind? Someone's got to choose those items, those things. So that's the problem, is that inequality is in the mind of the beholder, and it's based on perception, bias, and prejudice. So what essentially is happening here, if you think about it, is collectivists are confusing entitlement with injustice. Yeah, punishment is being attached, if you like, to the wrong thing. And what that really is just raising this issue of what we might call entitlement, which is dangerous. So the attempt to fix this through legislation is seen as fixing what they perceive as an injustice, and therefore they feel that there is an entitlement to something that somebody doesn't have. Okay, so that might be, what would that be? That might be a right to a house, a right to your children's education or something like that, a right to free healthcare. Yeah. Actually, when you really break this down and start to look at it, you realize actually that there is no entitlement to that. It might be nice in some ways, but actually you don't really have an entitlement to that. Why? Because actually, in order to provide that, someone else has got to pay for it, and you're going to have to force that out of somebody else. And ultimately, what's going to be your ultimate sanction to that? Kick their door down, threaten them with violence, and take them out and send them to prison if they're not going to pay for that. You can't do it. You don't have the moral authority to do it. So this is where, excuse me, this is where people start to bottle it as being an individualist. The beginning stage of that process of looking at what individualism is, everybody's on board with it. My rights end where yours begin. All of these things sound really sensible and really good. But when you extrapolate that out to its sort of final resulting conclusions, you get to that point where you can't really have an NHS, you can't have an education system in the way that we're used to having. Why? Because as I've just said, you're going to force people to pay for that. And collectivists at this point will start to accuse individualists for being unfeeling and unkind. Okay, because that's what I'm starting to propose, that you can't do that. Except when you think about it, actually individualists are not unkind, because we're the ones that are wishing for non-interference. Yeah, we're just not wanting to pay our own taxes. It's not just that, but we also recognize that nobody should pay taxes, because it is each individual's decision to decide for themselves how they might wish to display genuine altruism. Okay, so meaning how would you choose how you want to give to charity, how you want to assist other people in the community. It's your decision how much you do that and how to do it as well. Yeah, not the fake altruism, which is often claimed through a collectivist society. Why do I call it a fake altruism? Because actually we pretend in society that we are a generous society because we look after the less fortunate, right? But actually you're not really. That's just a pretense, because you're really doing it under duress. You're doing it because you're being forced to do it, because if you didn't, you'd probably end up in prison. Yeah. So let's not pretend. At least, individualism is a bit more honest about these things. Yeah. So that's an important point that people often miss. So, as I've said, one could choose from billions of examples of misfortune or inequality. Where do you stop? One man's misfortune is another man's opportunity. But I'm not saying as an individualist that one shouldn't engage in charity. Absolutely, we should. Now, I'm just looking at my notes to see what else is coming up here. The problem is simply that money and assets are being forced out of people in this redistribution exercise. Having taxes in place within a society is itself a lie that we are all generous or kind to each other, when it's not really the case. Now, the other thing it's probably worth talking about is the inefficiency of tax. Yeah, we don't know where that taxation is going because that often gets obfuscated. It tends to get pooled centrally, which is a big gripe that people have. And therefore, there's a lack of openness and transparency in where that taxation money is going. It creates a condition that would allow dishonesty to flourish, quite frankly. And not only that, but the taxation is enormous. The amount of taxation that we all pay is absolutely colossal. Why is that? Because we've got a ballooning state. Yeah, as a government grows, you get a kind of exponential growth in the number of administrators and IT systems that are needed, infrastructure, etc., in order to cope with that. So government just has to grow a little bit in providing some kind of service to people, except that it's not a service because you're forced into accepting it. And then with that, of course, is that you need an exponential growth in people to administer that and make it all function. So it only has to grow a little bit, and you've just got this massive problem on your hands. So, and besides, taxes are not getting the job done anyway. Just take a look at the condition of the roads, for example. Yeah, we're paying this colossal amount of tax, but we're not actually seeing the results. Yeah. Let's have a look at what else we've got over here. So charity is great. Genuine altruism, seeing another's needs as greater than one's own is what altruism actually is. But doing that from a voluntary action is where the real value lies in altruism. It's just a lie to pretend that a society is altruistic when you have to do it. Yeah. So a few other things, actually, just carrying on with this taxation thing. Despite paying a lot of taxes, I've said that, people still appear to give a lot to charity. That's an interesting point. Is that people are still generous. Huge amounts of money is given to charity, even though we're paying colossal amounts of tax. So if they didn't have to pay those vast taxes that are actually quite inefficient and we're not seeing good results from, can you imagine how much they would give? I would argue that people would be more generous, not only because they're not paying taxes, but because it's their choice to do so. And as it's their choice, and it's also their choice to whom they are giving as well. Yeah. Again, it's all down to this business of voluntary action and choice. So there are some thoughts about the difference between righting what people see as an injustice, but it isn't. It's just a difference in fortune and misfortune between people, and you can't correct that. There isn't really a way of correcting that. Because you could go on forever doing that. And it's only one man's choice as to what that thing is that you're correcting. Yeah. And equity, of course, keep in mind, is really about us all being under the same set of standards under the law. That's good. That's a different thing. So I just thought that would be really useful as part 5 there, just looking at the differences between equality and equity. And you can see there that the use of groupthink, if you like, and collectivism and authority is bringing about some interesting results that I think when you really look into it, we're not really intending. It's not the right thing. I hope you found that useful. Cheers for now.